Welcome to Sailing the East. I'm Bela and Mike.
And I'm Mike Wasserman.
This is our podcast about sailing the East Coast of the United States. In some episodes, we will focus on destinations. In other episodes, we'll talk about boats, equipment, and techniques. And when we come across an interesting person, we'll try to get them to be a guest on the show.
What makes this podcast unusual, though, is that only one of us sails.
Yeah, and that would be me, Bela. I've been sailing for over 30 years. Not across oceans, but on lakes and coastal cruising on the East Coast of the United States.
And I, Mike, know very little about sailing. I don't know port from starboard, and a tack to me is something other kids put on my chair right before I sat on it when I was in elementary school. Regardless to say, I will ask most of the questions and Bela will provide most of the answers. So, Bela, in our last episode, you gave us some great history and shared your impressions of Marion, Massachusetts. Where are we off to today?
Well, today, Mike, I want to talk about an overnight passage I did from Marion, Massachusetts to Port Washington, New York, which is approximately 150 nautical miles.
Okay, so describe this to me on the map that I keep in my head. What direction are we headed to, and what does the passage look like?
Yeah, so Marion, Massachusetts, if you remember, is off of Buzzards Bay. So that's sort of out near Cape Cod. And Port Washington is in Manhasset Bay, which is on the north side of Long Island, really close to New York City. So it's sort of the western part of Long Island, northern shore, as they call it. And it's a really, Port Washington is a great place to stop if you're transiting the East River, or in other words, if you're going to go through New York City on a boat. The way you do that is you typically sail into Long Island Sound if you're coming from the north, and you go through the East River and down past Manhattan and then down into the Atlantic Ocean. So regardless of the direction you're going in, Port Washington is a great place to stop over when you're transiting the East River, because one of the things about going through New York City, just a little aside here, is the East River has some pretty swift currents, depending upon which way the tide is going. So you sort of want to time your passage through there to take advantage of the current, particularly if you're on a sailboat, because sailboats only go 5 or 6 miles an hour and the current can be 2 or 3. So you want it pushing you and not fighting you. But going from Marion to Port Washington, at 150 nautical miles, when I do my passage planning, I put in, all right, I assume I'm going to be able to do about 5 knots. So if it's 150 nautical miles at 5 knots, that's 30 hours, I think, if I did my arithmetic right. So when you're doing these passages that are long like that, you would think that, well, gee, why do you want to go overnight? Why don't you try to do, during the day? And what this is really about, trying to plan when you're going to arrive. And it's not about when you're leaving. So you try to estimate if it's a 30-hour passage, and I want to, because what you want to arrive in a new place during daylight hours. You don't want to be going into a new harbor or a new port at night. At least I don't want to be. There's plenty of people who do it, but that's too risky for me. So I want to arrive during the daylight. So you sort of say, okay, I want to get there maybe between 10 and noon. So then you work backwards to figure out when you have to leave, assuming 5 knot average speed. So go from Marion to Port Washington, if I remember correctly, you leave around 10 o'clock in the morning, right? And so 10 o'clock the following morning, you're 24 hours, and then you add 10 more hours to that, and you're getting there towards the end of the day. So you might even want to leave maybe a little earlier from Marion, because you want to sort of, again, arrive during the daylight hours, and you want to build some cushion into that, because it's always easier if you're ahead of schedule to slow down a little bit. If things are going, I'm going faster because I had great winds and some good currents, and gee, it looks like I'm going to arrive at 4 in the morning. it's always easy for me to slow down. But if things have taken longer and it looks like if I don't speed up, I'm going to arrive at 9 o'clock at night or 10 o'clock at night, it's difficult to speed things up. So this is where passage planning and sort of just the timing of all of this becomes really, really critical, at least from my perspective, again, from a safety issue. Does that make sense, Mike?
Yeah, no. Yeah, I get this. But, I've done a little bit of night sailing, and it really seemed disconcerting to me. Small boat, lots of water, lots of potential obstacles that you can't see. And to me, it's like, okay, you could do this, but you could just sail during the day and then stop. And then in the morning, you leave and you go again. Am I off base on this? I mean, what's the appeal of night sailing when it seems so scary?
Well, first of all, you make an excellent point, Mike. Going from Marion, Mass to Port Washington, there are lots and lots of ports that we could have stopped in and broken this down into 3 or 4 days of 6 to 10 hours of sailing, because the north coast of Long Island Sound, which is Connecticut shore, and the north shore of Long Island have lots of harbors and ports that you can stop in, and you're right, you can break it into pieces. And one of the great things about sailing on the East Coast of the United States is that except for the coast of New Jersey and except for the coast of Delaware, the rest of the whole eastern shoreline, there are lots of places where you can stop in and out. So you can do these 4 to 10 hour hops, and you can do the whole trip during the daylight. And a couple places are a little trickier. It depends upon the size of your boat, how much water you draw, etc. But that's the beauty of sort of the East Coast. There's other parts of the United States where that just doesn't exist, and there's very few places to stop. But we wanted to do an overnight sail in this particular case, right? That was part of the plan, part of the challenge, part of what we were looking forward to doing. And you're right, it is sort of disconcerting. It gets dark, right? Yeah, right, Bela. We all know it gets dark at night. However, unless there's cloud cover, it's amazing how well you can see at night, particularly if you let your eyes adjust and you don't have a lot of bright lights turned on in the boat. So, for example, it turns out our iris in our eyeball does not respond to red light, meaning it doesn't constrict. So if you look at the instruments on cockpits of all airplanes, all the instrument lights are red, right? You can still see them, but if it's dark out and you look at the red light, your iris is not going to shut down, which then ruins your night vision. And the same thing is true on a boat. We have a red light in the cockpit, so we can still see, but it's not going to screw up our night vision. The same thing is true when you go down below in the boat. We have some red lights down there, so we use red lights for night light in the galley and in the other parts of the boat. So again, it doesn't ruin your night vision. And it's remarkable how well you can actually see at night. The only time it becomes a real challenge is if there's a pretty good thick cloud cover, because it's going to block the starlight and it's going to block the moonlight. So that's number one. Number one, you can see better than you think you can. The other interesting thing that I noticed is that your other senses get heightened, right? So all of a sudden, you're sort of hearing and even your sense of smell, right? But your hearing is sort of heightened, and you start hearing things that maybe during the day you don't hear as well, right? So you hear the wave patterns, you hear other boats off in the distance, etc. So that's I found that to be really interesting. And the real thing, I think, is lights. Lights are to me the most confusing thing. So your navigation aids, your buoys. So there's buoys out in the water that, particularly when you start getting close to shore, and some of them have red lights on them, some of them have green lights on them, some of them have white lights on them, and they mean different things. And so as a mariner, you need to know what those things mean. And boats also have lights on them: red lights, green lights, and white lights. So And if you understand what those lights mean, again, it gives you some ability to sort of figure out what your surroundings are.
Cool.
And
Can you give me an example? Like, I realized this, right? And I saw that when I was sailing at night with my friends who were experienced, that there's like almost a language or a pattern or something, right? That it was completely non-obvious to me. But what is some of that knowledge? Can you kind of give me an example of how you'd use the lights to help you?
Yeah, sure. So for buoys, for example, easy rule of thumb to remember, Mike, is red, right, returning. So when you're coming back from the ocean, right, or you're going upstream, right, the red buoys or the red lights should be on your right-hand side or starboard. The green should be on your left-hand side. So that marks the channel. So the red is on the right, green is on the left. Stay between the red and the green because that's where the deep water is going to be.
Got it. And if you're going the other direction, if you're either going downstream or out to the ocean, it's the opposite. Yeah.
That's right. That's right. So that's a real good sort of quick red, right, returning. That's how I remember it. Right.
Okay. Got it.
And boats have red lights on the bow. There's a red and green light on the bow. Okay. And there's a white light that you see when you see the back of the boat. So if you see a white light and a red light and it's moving, that tells you that that boat has the right of way over you because I see red. Yeah. He has the right of way. And when he's looking at my boat, he's going to actually see a green light and a white light. That tells him he's got the right of way. So these lights are meaningful. Now the real challenge, honestly, if you're out 10 miles offshore, the only lights you're going to see are buoys, if there are any out there, because oftentimes there's not once you're out in deep water, and you'll see the lights of other boats. That's it. It's pretty simple. When it really becomes tricky, Mike, is when you start getting close to land. Because, for example, what color are traffic lights?
Okay, red, yellow, green. Right.
Right. You don't see yellow very well, but you see red and green pretty good. Right? And most lights, street lights, etc., are white. So it becomes really confusing. And buoy lights, again, are red and green, and they blink at night so you can see them, and they blink at different patterns. So when you have a chart in front of you, i.e. a map of where you're going, the chart's the nautical name for a map, it'll tell you that red number 6 flashes every 2 seconds.
Ah, and there's the pattern. Yeah.
And red number 8 flashes every 1 second. And red number 10 flashes once every 5 seconds. Right? So it tells you this information so you can sort of figure that out as compared to the lights that are on shore or compared to the lights of other boats. So there's a whole bit of information out here, and it's all important information to help get you sort of understand where you are within your environment. And it's really important. And again, I always like to try out these new things during the daylight. So, okay, I say to myself, I'm sailing and I'm coming up to a buoy, and I try to figure out, okay, is that supposed to be a red buoy I'm coming up on, or is it supposed to be a green one? And I look on the chart and say, oh, am I really where I think I am, etc. So I try to get these correlations when I can take advantage of all the visual cues under normal daylight conditions, so that I'm not trying to figure this stuff out for the first time at night. Right. I think that's the danger that you can have here is if it's like with your radar. If the first time you're using your radar is at night, that's the wrong time to start using it, right? I like to use my
Exactly.
radar during the daylight. So when I look at the screen and I look down at this radar screen and then I look up at the horizon, I can make a visual correlation of what those two images are. Whereas if I'm doing that for the first time at night, the only correlation I have is what the screen says.
Makes sense.
So,
Yep.
so that to me is a really big and important tip is you try this stuff out under non-pressure situations, under sort of daylight hours. You understand how all these things work and sort of what lights things should have. And quite honestly, I have a cheat sheet. I have a cheat sheet for lights, right? It's a little placard, 8.5 by 11. Because, for example, lights on boats get a lot more complicated than I talked about. Larger boats start having more combinations of lights, which tell you how big it is. It tells you whether it's towing anything or not, right? Because the last thing you want to do is get between a tugboat towing a barge, and that barge could easily be 500-600 feet behind the tugboat, right? So you don't want to cut in between those two, because the thing you're the one that's going to suffer. So lights start getting a little more complex, and I can't remember all of the various different combinations there are, because I don't do it enough. But I have a little cheat sheet that I can refer to, because if I see something that has two white lights over a green light, well, that's telling me something. And I can't tell you what it tells you, but if I look at my cheat sheet, I can tell you, oh, that's a so-and-so and it's doing this, right? And I think the other thing that has really changed at least my comfort level of because I often wonder about, man, how did people do this 20, 30 years ago when we didn't have AIS? And we didn't have GPS in particular, right? So let me explain what GPS is. Just like the GPS in your car. So it tells you where you're at, tells you all the things that are around you. So that is like godsend, particularly at night and even during the day. AIS is a very interesting system where other boats and all commercial vessels over a certain length have to have AIS on them. They broadcast a signal, and that signal says their location, how fast they're going, what direction they're going in, and the name of the vessel, and how long they are. And my GPS screen picks that signal up, and it puts it on my screen. So I can see basically all the other ships and boats around me. So pleasure vessels are not required to have this system, but more and more of them are getting it. So not only does my screen that I look at, I'll call it my GPS screen, it's called a chart plotter. So this chart plotter not only tells me, where the buoys are, how deep the water is, where the land is, and I can zoom in and out just like you can on your car GPS, but it also tells me where the other ships are. And the software in my GPS will tell me whether we are on a collision course or not, right? Because it knows how fast I'm going. And it will tell me actually how close we'll get to each other. So that's a great comfort. And the other boats can see me. And it makes it really easy to call somebody on the radio at night to say, because I know the name of the vessel. Where before I would say, the boat that's approximately 3 miles off of, Buzzards Harbor, please, can you call me back, right? Because I had no way of knowing what their name is. So now you know their name, you know their heading. So it's easy to say, hey, I Paradox, I'm calling your boat, and you can answer, and we can have a conversation and say, hey, look, I see you. Do you see me? Yep. How about if we pass port to port? Or I'm going to let you go in front of me. Or, can you go behind me, right? So to have this conversation. And it's amazing how a lot of people are reluctant to call up commercial vessels and have that conversation. And I do it all the time. And because number one, I want to make sure they see me. And I want to make sure that we both have the same intentions. Right? Or if I'm going to, because he may say, look, I have limited maneuverability. I'm towing something. I can't turn. So you're going to have to figure out a way of getting around me, little guy, because I can't turn. So that communication piece is also really, really important at night. So how's that? Does it make you more comfortable or more scared?
No, makes sense. So it's a matter of having kind of some cool tools and some technology. B, practicing with it many times before you go out at night. And then C, using it, especially when it comes to communicating. So that seems to me to be the takeaways from night sailing school.
I think you're right, Mike.
With Bela. Yeah?
Yeah. Yeah. Now let's talk about one other quick things before we go, and that's taking night watch.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's the law that you're supposed to have someone on watch, i.e. awake, and kind of looking all the time. So this is where you have to have, from my perspective, I don't know how solo sailors do it, but that's a whole nother topic. I think you want to have at least 2 people on board. And if it's a one-night sail, if it's just one overnight, 2 of you can sort of power through one night, right? But what we usually typically do on this passage from Marion to Port Washington, there was 3 of us, and we set up a watch schedule. So you were on for 3 hours, and then you were off for 6, because there's 3 of us, right? We each take 3 hours, 3 on, 6 off. And we started that immediately when we left Marion. So even during the day, so I would know that I'm in charge of the boat. I'm the watch captain from 9 a.m. to noon. And then I'm off from noon to 6. And then at 6 o'clock, I'm back on from 6 to 9 p.m. Right? And then I'm off from 9 p.m. to 3 a.m. And then I'm back on from 3 a.m. to 6 a.m. So it helps you sort of plan what you're going to do. And then the other thing we would do is we'd say, okay, you, Bela, are going to be responsible. We're all going to take care of ourselves for breakfast and for lunch. We'll just make our own sandwiches and whatever. But you, Bela, are cooking dinner the first night, and Tom's cooking dinner the second night. Right? And all this stuff's important because then you know what you have to get done and do. Right? So you're not sort of trying to figure out who's going to do what when. And so I'm a big believer in sort of figuring out the watch schedule before departure and starting it even during the daylight, and not doing it just at night, but you're actually doing it during the daytime as well, so you can plan. So there you go.
No, I like it. All right, what do you think? Let's wrap this up. Thanks for joining us, listeners, today. We hope you found the episode interesting and thought-provoking. If you have questions about what we discussed, please feel free to reach out to us at sailingtheeast, all one word, @gmail.com.
Hey, and please do subscribe if you haven't already. We'd really enjoy having you as a frequent listener. So until next week, signing off from upstate New York. Hey, Mike, talk to you soon.
Thanks, Bela. See you next time. From over here in Münster, Germany, signing off.
Fair winds and calm seas to everyone.